Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. I'm Sandy Shellis, and it's really good to see you all here. Uh, Tonight, I have a very interesting show. It's a little different than the usual climate shows, but I have quite a topic and a lot of information. And I also made a little video documentary. I wasn't sure I was going to come live tonight. I thought maybe I would just play my film. And hello, Kim. Thank you for moderating. It's always great. And BB, hi. I'm saying hi, Kristen. Hi, Tony. Hi, Rollin Switch. Hello, climate teacher John and Veg and everybody. And Anthony, I'm glad you're here and you're feeling well. But we do have to get started. I think, yeah, it's important to get started. Don't you think? Okay. So the first thing we're going to do here is a screen share, and I have, like a little thing that starts, well, okay. So my presentation here, and it is basically just, I called it Clusterfuck Bombed. That's how I feel. Like, basically, we are kind of in a clusterfuck, aren't we? All right. So everybody and their brother has done articles on this. They're all reporting on it. But I'm going to do a little bit of a different report. So one of the first things I'm going to show you is what they look like. And they are pretty awful. They're pretty awful. Yeah, I think they're pretty awful. Oh, wait, I have to change something. Shut that. Sorry. I need to get my thing back. I'm playing around with the screen share. And what did I do? Took it away. I took it away. All right. Sorry, guys. Like I said, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I have all these screens to look at. So this is this. And then I want to make sure that we hear her. And that's where all this stupid crap started. Okay, let's go for it. Here we go, Amy.
The United States is facing questions at home and worldwide over its decision to send cluster munitions to Ukraine.
Last year, the White House said that use of cluster munitions deserves to be in the category of war crime. Now they're saying just fine, no problem. This is a way of saying that we want to run the world, we make the rules, we break the rules. It's also a way of saying that when civilians are killed, and it's done by an enemy state, that's terrible. We condemn it because we have the high moral ground. But when we are accessories to the crime, when we do it, as the U.S. did in the invasion of Iraq, using 1.8 to 2 million so-called bomblets in the first few weeks of that invasion, when we do it, it's A-OK.
It's not A-OK. It's not A-OK for anyone to do it. It's not A-OK for anyone to walk down the street where they live, no matter what country they are, and see this, okay? So these are what the cluster bombs are. The munition is fired from the ground or the air, and then those little bomblets, they're released everywhere, and they fall to the ground, and a lot of them don't detonate immediately. They don't. And they really they're crazy. They're crazy. Well, the psychopaths, and it's not just the United States. It's everywhere, and you'll see. It's not just the United States. I mean, we have a lot of responsibility. Everybody sees us as, the bad guy, or a lot of people see us as the bad guy, maybe not so much the NATO countries or the West, but all right. So these things, and all war brings in lots of environmental incidents. Buried drums, tanks, pipework, containers, and these stay forever. They could stay forever. Evidence of leaks or spills, fuel, chemicals, soil or water with discoloration or odor, vegetation, dieback, and signs of stress. That's a big one. Dead or gasping fish and water bodies, fire and damaged assets, iridescent sheens, the oil when that spills. So there's a lot of things, and it's not just from cluster bombs. But what cluster bombs did do, more than 500,000 bombing missions were conducted over Laos during the Vietnam War. And I remember as a child hearing the news. I remember it. And there was one bombing mission every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day for 9 years. 9 years. So in Laos, her name is Peng, and she is in a group of women that actually, this is a video I took the screenshot and from it's years ago, but this is what they do. This is their job. Their job is to go out and find these things, to find these cluster bombs that have been sitting in the ground since the 1960s and 70s. Yes, for real, seriously, that can explode and that have exploded. And it's pretty awful. So we're going to move on, and I'm going to bring up the articles. I have 1 million articles. I'm not going to read them all because it's like I can't read them all. There would be just too many to read. But I'm going to start with Politico, which is what? Sort of like quasi middle right, whatever. It doesn't really matter what it is. They're all crazy. So I'm just going to pick out. I am going to cherry pick a little bit. I'm going to cherry pick a little bit of what Barbara Lee said from California. And she said they should never be used. And that is a crossing line. I think the president has been doing a good job managing the war, this Putin aggressive war against Ukraine, but I think this should not happen. I think a lot of people are feeling that way. And what are we going to do? They said different views here. It says different views on whether the weapons constitute a violation of international law. Even Jen Psaki said previously that Russia's use of such weapons could potentially constitute a war crime. It is a war crime. The whole thing is a war crime. It's one big war crime. So cluster munitions. This was from National Library of Medicine. This was from 2018. And what I wanted to bring out here was, again, it's not just Americans and it's not just Ukraine. It's every freaking stupid war that has any kind of influence from a big military contractor. And this was estimations indicate that during July-August 2006, hostilities between Lebanon and Israel, 4.6 million submunitions were released over Lebanon, 1 million of which remained unexploded. All right. So after the war, these unexploded duds continued to cause injuries and deaths when civilians returned to their land. And the war provided momentum for a campaign to ban cluster munitions. And on August 1st, 2010, of this convention, with 103 full parties and 17 signatories, it actually established a framework to assist victims and their communities. And that's where I had gotten that picture from. So you see, it's not just, this time. And I really want to go through this one. This is the Cluster Munition Coalition, and I looked a lot at this group. And I want to give you a timeline of cluster bomb use. So cluster munitions have been used by 20 states during armed conflict in over 35 countries: Yemen, Syria, Ukraine. So here's a timeline. And this timeline goes all the way back. I'm going to start from the bottom. 1943 in the USSR, Soviet forces used airdrop cluster munitions against German armor. German forces use SD-1 and SD-2 butterfly bombs against artillery on Kursk salient. 1943 in the United Kingdom, German aircraft dropped more than 1,000 SD-2 butterfly bombs on the port of Grimsby. And I'm saying these are those kinds of munitions. 1960s and 70s in Cambodia, Laos, U.S. forces make extensive use of cluster munitions in bombing campaigns. The ICRC estimates that in Laos alone, which I talked about, 9 to 27 million unexploded munitions remain, and some 11,000 people have been killed or injured, more than 30% of them kids. And then, of course, we're going to go on to the wildlife. Then we can jump up to 75 to 88, the Western Sahara. Moroccan forces use cluster munitions against NSAG. 1971 to 73, Syria. Israel uses air-dropped cluster munitions against non-state armed group training camps near Damascus. 1978 in Lebanon, Israel uses cluster munitions in southern Lebanon. 1979 to 89, Afghanistan, Soviet forces make use of airdropped and rocket-delivered cluster musicians. If it was musicians, we'd have a happy world, wouldn't we? Munitions. 1982 in Lebanon, Israel uses them. 1982 in the Falklands, UK, aircraft dropped cluster munitions in Argentinian infantry positions near Port Stanley, Port Howard, and Goose Green. 1986 to 87 in Chad, French aircraft. Well, you getting it, guys? 1991. Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. Then it goes to Angola, Nagorno-Karabakh. In the 90s, Bosnia-Herzegovina. We have to remember that one, okay? We have to remember that. Chechnya, Croatia, Sudan, Sierra Leone, Colombia, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. The Congo, Albania, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Uganda, Iraq, again in the 2003 to 2006. 2006, Israel uses them again in Lebanon, cluster munitions against Hezbollah. And then Hezbollah fires more than 100 Chinese-produced cluster munitions. So there's cluster bombs all over the world in the ground, just sitting there. 2008 in Georgia, Russia uses several types of cluster munitions, both air and ground, in a number of locations in the Georgia Gori district. And Cambodia in 2011, Thailand uses cluster munitions on Cambodian territory. 2011, Libya. 2012, Sudan. Ongoing in Syria. South Sudan. Ukraine in 2014 and 15, okay? They were used by both sides in that conflict. 2014 to 17, Libya. 2015, Sudan. 2015 to 18, Yemen. And 2012 to 2018, Syria. Yes, this cluster munition monitor definitely has a good, and then they show you in it's specific, and they have what is a cluster bomb, and they'll tell you, they have the different stories. So it's a pretty good website, and it will be in the show notes. And even the veterans are upset. This is from Popular Resistance, and this is a group response to Biden's cluster bombs for Ukraine. It's a horrific escalation of the war in Ukraine. Now, does the United States really think that if we send all this shit over there and bomb the living shit out of whoever and whatever is in Ukraine, that this is going to end? I mean, why can't we have a meeting, a peace treaty? Doesn't that happen? No, because the bottom line, there's some greed involved in here. So this group, Veterans for Peace, and other U.S. anti-war organizations denounce Biden's administration to send cluster bombs. And a lot of people are, but not everybody. There is there's two sides of the coin, and I know that there was some people on the left and some people on the right that were all cheering this shit on, probably along with the weapons manufacturers. So there is a Scranton plant of a weapons manufacturer, and it produces 11,000 artillery shells a month. Jobs, guys, jobs. They have to keep up. It can't keep up with the demand for killing. No. That the U.S. would even consider sending cluster bombs, a weapon designed to wound as many people as possible, into Ukraine war to make up for a lack of artillery shells is horrifying and revealing. And listen, guys, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm taking anyone's fucking side because they're all psychopaths. I don't like any of them. Russia's wrong, Ukraine's wrong, the United States wrong, everybody's wrong in all of this crazy fucking shit war. We have a climate crisis. We are breaking heat records, but no, it's so much more important to go to war. So the veterans from popular, and of course this is popular resistance, you have to remember. It reveals that just how little the U.S. cares for Ukrainian people and their futures, and even the Russian people, because they all cross the border in the peacetime. In post-war areas where cluster bombs have been used, they wreak havoc, a horrific toll on children who picked up the unexploded duds. Corporations reaping bloody profits from cluster bombs are the only beneficiaries of this tragic policy and this war. Cluster bombs prove how ready the U.S. is to turn Ukraine into a desperate, barely governable country like Afghanistan or Iraq, where it also used cluster bombs as one way to dominate these nations and control their resources. Sound familiar? Cluster bombs expose the lengths the U.S. government is willing to go, the suffering that it is willing to cause, and the proxies that it is willing to exploit in its ceaseless effort to dominate the planet. Now, look, there are a lot of people who feel horrible about what's happening in Ukraine. It shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't have started. Regardless of how it started, that's not why I'm here, okay? I am not here to say it started because of and what about ism and all that shit. I'm here to talk about the fact that it just is all bad. But cluster munitions are horrible, and I am definitely anti-war. I'm not happy with this war. I've said it before. I don't like Vladimir Putin. Different reasons maybe than other people may say. I don't like him because he did this. The world can no longer work with Russian scientists to solve problems that they were working on. And I'm not saying solve climate change. I'm not saying we can solve anything, but they had little problems, little issues, little things they were working on together, and they can't. And he's a psychopath. They're all psychopaths. I think if you get into that, I don't know what happens to people when they get up there. So even back in 2010, the International Committee of the Red Cross, they even said, what are they and what is the problem? And so they talked about it from the humanitarian perspective. And they are a persistent problem for decades. The wide area effects of these weapons and the large number of submunitions that fail to explode as intended have caused large numbers of civilian casualties. And they're talking about human beings. I'm going to talk about the animals. I'm going to talk about the wildlife and the ecological cluster bomb fuck that this is. So the Red Cross has been on this for forever, okay? And why? See, history has shown that large numbers of them fail to explode, which we've said. They are area weapons. They often explode when handled or disturbed. So civilians, there's a mom, a deer, a bear, a mama bear. They walk over it, boom, they're gone. Let's see. Now this is from 2010, so it may have changed. 34 countries are known to have produced over 210 different types of cluster munitions, projectiles, bombs, rockets, missiles, dispensers. It makes me want to throw up. Because every fucking moron in the United States that loves guns wants to walk around with a cluster bomb thrower over their shoulder. Okay. Well, Now I'm going to calm down. And I'm going to show you a movie. We're going to change a little bit. And I need a breath. I need a breath. I'm tired of it. We're in a time when the planet is telling us goodbye. And we're sending cluster bombs. You know, the United States has no moral leadership like Barbara Lee said we've lost. When did we have it? And I love my country. I've lived here all my life. I've never been anywhere else. I want to. Taking a breath. Let's take a deep breath, guys, together. Okay, get the popcorn. I made a movie. I hope you like it. It's definitely going to go in a little bit of a different direction, but not that much. So here we go. Turn that one off. The environmental impact of wars begins long before they do. Building and sustaining military forces consumes vast quantities of resources. These might be common metals or rare earth elements, water or hydrocarbons. Maintaining military readiness means training, and training consumes resources. Military vehicles, aircraft, vessels, buildings, and infrastructure all require energy, and more often than not, that energy is oil, and energy efficiency is low. The CO2 emissions of the largest militaries are greater than that of many of the world's countries combined. It is estimated that militaries are responsible for 5.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions globally. However, military emissions reporting to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is poor. Militaries also need large areas of land and sea, whether for bases or facilities or for testing and training. Military lands are believed to cover between 1 to 6% of the global land surface. In many cases, these are ecologically important areas. While excluding public development from these areas can be a benefit to biodiversity, the question of whether they could be better managed as civil protected areas is rarely discussed. Military training creates emissions, disruptions to landscapes and terrestrial and marine habits, and creates chemical and noise pollution from the use of weapons, aircraft, and vehicles. Sustaining and renewing military equipment and material means ongoing disposal costs with implications for the environment. It is not just the most hazardous nuclear and chemical weapons that create environmental problems throughout their life cycle. The same is also true for conventional weapons, particularly where they are disposed of through open burning or detonation. Historically, vast quantities of surplus munitions were also dumped at sea. A history of weak environmental oversight has left many countries with serious environmental legacies linked to military pollution, with impacts on public health and vast costs for environmental remediation. These continue to grow as emerging pollutants like PFAS are identified. These legacies are also a problem around overseas bases where one-sided agreements with host nations can reduce environmental oversight. Indirectly, high levels of military spending diverts resources away from solving environmental problems and away from sustainable development. International tensions stoked by high levels of military spending also reduce opportunities for international cooperation on global environmental threats, such as the climate emergency. It is also important to consider how security policies and militarism are tailored to ensuring access to and control of natural resources like oil, gas, water, and metals. The environmental impact of conflicts themselves vary greatly. Some international armed conflicts may be brief but highly destructive. Some civil wars may last for decades but be fought at low intensity. Many contemporary conflicts have blurred the lines, lasting years, but with sustained periods of high-intensity warfare. Who is fighting, where they're fighting, and how they're fighting all strongly influence the environmental impact of a conflict. High-intensity conflicts require and consume vast quantities of fuel, leading to massive CO2 emissions and contributing to climate change. Large-scale vehicle movements can lead to widespread physical damage to sensitive landscapes and geodiversity, as can the intensive use of explosive ordnance. The use of explosive weapons in urban areas creates vast quantities of debris and rubble, which can cause air and soil pollution. Pollution can also be caused by damage to light industry and environmentally sensitive infrastructure such as water treatment plants. The loss of energy supplies can have reverberating effects that are detrimental to the environment, shutting down treatment plants or pumping systems, or lead to the use of more polluting fuels or domestic generators. Severe pollution incidents can be caused when industrial, oil, or energy facilities are deliberately attacked, inadvertently damaged, or disrupted. In some cases, deliberate attacks on oil or industrial facilities are used as a weapon of war to pollute large areas and spread terror. Other scorched earth techniques include the destruction of agricultural infrastructure like canals, wells, and pumps, and the burning of crops. Tactics like these threaten food security and livelihoods, increasing the vulnerability of rural communities. Whether unintended or deliberate, these large-scale pollution incidents can lead to transboundary impacts from air pollution or through the contamination of rivers, aquifers, or the sea. In some instances, they even have the potential to affect weather or the global climate. Weapons and military material used during conflicts also leave environmental legacies. Landmines, cluster munitions, and other explosive remnants of war can restrict access to agricultural land and pollute soils with water sources that are destroyed, with metals and toxic energetic materials. In major conflicts, large volumes of military scrap may be produced or abandoned. This can contain chronic health risks. Wrecked or damaged ships, submarines, and offshore oil infrastructure can cause marine pollution. Many conventional weapons have toxic constituents. Others, such as depleted uranium, are also radioactive. Incendiary weapons, such as white phosphorus, are not only toxic, but can also damage habitats through fire. While now restricted, the widespread use of chemical defoliants damaged public and ecological health across large areas of Vietnam. Easy access to small arms and light weapons can harm wildlife through facilitating increased hunting and poaching. And the ungoverned spaces created by conflict create the ideal conditions for wildlife crime. Weapons used in wildlife crime have been found to have been sourced from countries affected by conflict. Scientists and researchers may be unable to access areas due to security problems, harming conservation programs. While national parks and protected areas may lose what protection they had, or protecting them may be more difficult when poachers are armed, these situations can encourage more militarized conservation, which can have negative effects on relationships with local communities. Deforestation often increases during conflicts. Much of the time, this is due to overharvesting by communities who are suddenly reliant on wood and charcoal for fuel and heating. But it could also be as a result of armed or criminal gangs taking advantage of the collapse of management systems. Civilian coping strategies can also lead to the overharvesting of other natural resources or to environmentally damaging practices such as artisanal oil refining. And in some cases, community systems of sustainable resource management may be disrupted. Environmental damage and degradation can also stem from resource extraction used to finance conflicts. In many conflicts, armed groups vie for control over oil, mineral resources, or timber. Processing methods such as the use of mercury and gold mining can pollute water bodies. In addition to armed groups and artisanal workers, private companies may also be active in areas affected by conflict, often operating with minimal environmental oversight. Human displacement is common to many conflicts. Camps for refugees and internally displaced peoples can have large environmental footprints, particularly where they are unplanned or lack essential services like water, sanitation, and waste management. Their location is also important, as camp residents may be compelled to use local resources, such as firewood, which could place local resources under pressure. People displaced by conflict may also move internally to urban areas, swelling the population and placing local environmental services under strain. In some cases, the areas where displaced people move through may be placed under pressure. For example, herders moving their livestock through sensitive ecosystems. Large-scale refugee movements can also create transboundary environmental impacts when areas in neighboring countries struggle to cope with the influx of people and with meeting their basic needs. One basic need common to displacement camps and to urban areas experiencing conflict is waste management. Systems often break down during conflict, leading to increased rates of waste dumping and burning, improper management, and less waste segregation. It is rare these days for conflicts to conclude cleanly with a peace agreement and a ceasefire. Low-level conflict and insecurity can continue for long periods. In this respect, many of the forms of harm that occur during conflicts are also applicable to this phase, particularly in early stages. The presence of military forces can extend well into post-conflict phase. The operation and ultimate closure or handover of bases are associated with pollution issues, particularly where the host nation may be unable to enforce environmental standards. The use of practices like burn pits has exposed military personnel and communities to hazardous pollution, leaving veterans with ongoing health problems. The post-conflict clearance of landmines and explosive remnants of war can lead to soil degradation and localized pollution, and negative changes in land use when areas are released back to communities. The damage that conflicts do to environmental governance can have implications for environmental protection for years. This can set back progress on issues as diverse as pollution control, resource and protected area management, climate change adaptation, and biodiversity protection. Finally, the environmental costs of recovery may be significant. In this time of the climate crisis, overuse of all of Earth's resources, war is insane. War is what is leading to collapse. Collapse. Just what we need. And now we are going to get rid of war. Okay. Well, we've changed gears a little bit, and now we're going to move on. I hope you like that. That was what I was going to do just for the show, but I decided, well, I'll go live. I won't be here next Tuesday to go live, so I might as well tonight. And give you some graphics behind me that are lovely and, make us feel good, because it's really not easy to feel good on a consistent basis right now. Okay. I'm going to move. Now, we are going to go back, and now we're going to talk about the animals. All right. I don't have to be perfect. Okay, now we're going to move. What I want to show you, there are a lot of websites that have to do with animals and war. And here's one that I found, and they talk about, animals used in war, animals that go and find the munitions, often blowing themselves up before their human masters. They are victims of war. They are horrible zoos, aquariums, laboratories, farms. Domesticated or wild, animals suffer passively as victims of armed conflicts. During a war, animals kept in captivity are in a very vulnerable situation. They can be killed in two different ways. First, they can be killed directly by weapons. This can be by means of an airstrike, a bombardment, or at the hands of soldiers under the guise of necessity, in which it is decided that in a state of emergency there are not enough resources to care for the animals. And second, they can be killed passively, for example, by starvation after being abandoned in these installations they were kept in, their caretakers having either fled or died. Similarly, those kept as pets are also dependent on their human caretakers, who might willingly or not abandon them or even die in war, leaving the animals unable to survive on their own. And that is terrible. But then the suffering is dwarfed by harms that warfare inflicts on animals living in the wild. The most obvious way in which wild animals are directly impacted by warfare is by mines and these probably horrible cluster bombs, chemical weapons, fires. When these attacks don't kill the animal outright, they often leave them severely wounded or even disabled for life, an environment degraded by war. So I think we're going to take a look at some of the wildlife that are from this country of Ukraine. And everything will be in the show notes. You got the drift on that article. So there's Ukraine. And it's the second largest country by landmass in all of Europe. Okay. And the official state animal is the common nightingale. That's the official bird of Ukraine. And the rarest animals in Ukraine, the Eurasian lynx. There's a rare animal to spot in Ukraine. Are there any left? One of the rarest. And they are in woodlands and mountain ranges such as the Carpathians. Its fur is thick and usually has yellowish brown coloration with black markings on its face, legs, and tail. It has long tufts of black hair around its ears, which are used to detect movement from prey at great distances. They feed off small animals like hare or rabbits, but they'll scavenge. Gee, I almost think I have a Eurasian lynx in my yard. I keep finding dead rabbits. But that's natural selection. And then the largest animals, well, they're talking about actually the bison in Ukraine, and the last of the rare ones is the Iberian wolf. It's a subspecies of the gray wolf. They live mainly along Spain's northwestern coast, but there are some populations residing eastward towards parts of Ukraine near border regions. And then the largest animals in Ukraine, wild boars, okay? And the brown bear is found, and there's a Eurasian elk. And where to find them? Well, look at that. Ukraine has 50 national parks. Wow. I didn't go far enough to find out what was going on in the parks. And here's the hedgehogs. There's foxes, there's owls, there's martins, there's falcons. And there's bears. Yes. And there's snakes. And there's endangered animals, but I would tend to say that all of the animals in Ukraine are endangered now. God knows how many are dead, wiped out. This is a European bison. Do you think there's any left? Did they get them out of the country? There's European mink. There's a Sega antelope. There's European bison, and then the Danube crested newt. So there are a lot of animals in Ukraine. It's a big, beautiful country. And now they're all in danger because there is a madman. And his name is Vladimir Putin. I'm not going to disagree that he's not a madman. I'm sorry. Look at this. All of them. They're all beautiful, aren't they? Look at all these animals. The crab, spider, the crab, the cricket, the crow. I bet I have the dog tick. Yeah. There's something I definitely know I have in my yard. The dog tick. Oh. Well, anyway, we're going to move on. And there's another organization. I wanted you to see one of the reserves. Ascania Nova, the Biosphere Reserve. And it was in the late 19th century that this wildlife preserve, Ascania Nova, was founded by Friedrich Falls-Fein. He was a descendant of German colonists, and he owned vast territories in the south of Ukraine and successfully farmed there. So it's a pretty interesting story, which, again, in the interest of time tonight, I'm not reading all of these articles, but flora and fauna and animals and research and education, and it's a tourist center. I don't know what's become of it. I don't know if it's safe, but it's one of them, and there's so many of them. What a wonderful country. But now we're going to go to The Ecologist, and this is from January. Okay. The war is killing wildlife. Dolphins washed up. The Ukrainian environment minister told delegates at COP15 about the widespread damage. Now this was 2023, but they were talking about what happened at COP15. 700 Black Sea dolphins are known to have died, victims of acoustic trauma caused by sonar equipment on Russian submarines and mines. See, guys, it's not just the people. It's so much worse and so much more. And it's a crisis of ecological proportions in every country that has war. Civil wars in Africa, and Middle Eastern wars, and Israel bombing the shit out of Gaza, all of them. But nobody really talks about the animals. We are afraid to even imagine the scale of tragedy after the occupation of our territory and seas. Today, Ukraine is the country most contaminated with landmines in the world. Every mine is a death to an animal, he said. Almost every week, Russia launches massive missile strikes, already more than 4,700, and that was in January. They destroy a healthy living environment, and not only for humans. Ukraine, as we saw, is home to 74,000 species of plants and fungi, representing a third of Europe's biodiversity, despite Ukraine covering only 6% of the continent. Around 600 hectares of Ukrainian forest have been damaged by the war, some 32% of the country's total. A lot of territory has been burned, but we don't know exactly how much more than the 30% of land is mined. And now we are sending cluster bombs on top to add insult to injury. What do they think? Ukraine is going to just take these cluster bombs and bomb the shit out of all these different territories without any kind of care? Obviously, Russians don't give a shit. Not the people. The warmongers. I separate the people from the warmongers. I separate us from the warmongers and the deniers and the horrible people. The government. Oh, this guy's mission at the UN biodiversity talks was to raise awareness of the damage. Okay, so the government, aided by monitoring teams from the UN Environment Program, has so far documented more than 2,200 cases of environmental damage caused by Russia, including pollution of soil, air, water by military equipment, toxic chemicals, and emissions from fires. It's just bad. It's just bad. And I don't even want to go on with this one. I'm going to go to the Revelator, because this one is about saving. Okay? In Ukraine, saving wildlife harmed by war, for Ukrainian activists rescuing the dogs of war. Not to mention the cats, swans, bears, and other wildlife often means putting their own lives on the line. And this was from February. Saving Ukraine's injured and displaced animals during wartime often means seeing the worst elements of Russian cruelty. And I'm sorry, I don't care what you think, it's happening, and they are perpetrating a lot of it. When a territory is liberated, our team goes there and we speak with the people who survived the occupation, said Olga Chevanyuk, Chief Operating Officer of U-Animals, Ukraine's largest animal rights organization. And each time we hear that when Russians entered the town, they started shooting animals for fun, starting with dogs just walking the streets and ending with huge farms and shelters. Sometimes it's probably a matter of manipulation, getting people scared. But mostly it's no reason at all, just because they can. Originally founded to oppose inhumane conditions in circuses, the nonprofit U-Animals has shifted its mission to rescuing and caring for domestic animals and wildlife devastated by Russian aggression. And don't forget, guys, the My Lai massacre. We don't have clean hands, and we don't have clean hands in any country we've ever been in. Working with local volunteers and shelters, they've helped tens of thousands of animals since the war began a year ago, including dogs and cats and horses, deer, swans, birds of prey, and bats, even large predators like bears. In January, they alone rescued more than 9,600 animals, provided food and medicine to thousands more, rebuilt shelters, and helped fund operations throughout the country. If you want to make any kind of donation tonight, don't make it to me. Make it to one of the animal organizations. They found themselves purchasing supplies not traditionally used in animal rescues. Before the war, you never think of buying helmets for your team, Chevanyuk says. And then there's the human toll. The nonprofit has contracted with psychologists to provide on-demand assistance to its team in the field. So now that they can have a session with a psychologist when they're overwhelmed, can you imagine? They are working with all of these killed and injured, maimed animals. Okay, these are different people than work with the humans. It's a different kind of beast. It's all about saving more than individual animals' lives and human minds. It's about saving the soul of a country. A crime against nature. You Animals has started calling the Russian war an ecocide, the deliberate destruction of a natural environment. Nowadays, 20% of Ukraine's natural conservation areas are affected by war, she said. Russians occupy 8 national, here's the answer, and I read it and forgot. 8 national reserves and 12 national parks, and some of the national parks are landmined. Holy Mountains National Park is 80% destroyed. Some of them are destroyed 100%, meaning there's no plants, no animals, no buildings, which people use to heal animals. The land is littered with remains of destroyed objects like tons of oil and burned products. Landmines are among the worst problems. They kill humans and animals indiscriminately, start fires, and will take years to mitigate, like cluster bombs. About 62,000 square miles of Ukraine may be contaminated by those things. This is greater than the size of Illinois. The United States is investing way too fucking much. Cleaning up the pollution will require even more funding and effort. And, I have no doubt that we will have those people waiting to go over there and rebuild with them. The war has caused $37 billion in environmental damage. Now, this revelator is from the Center for Biological Diversity, by the way. Look at that. Look at that doggy. You Animals predicts it could take more than a decade to repair the damage, but Ukraine's wildlife doesn't have that much time. More than 80 species of animals in our country are on the verge of extinction and may completely cease to exist due to Russian aggression. Some of them are the steppe eagle, black stork, brown bear, the Eurasian lynx, that beautiful lynx we saw, barn owl, and the eared hedgehog. While many of the species also exist in other countries, Chavanyuk says wildlife has been an important element of Ukrainian folk songs, art, and symbology, the very fabric of its culture, for centuries. Being humane and treating animals as something really important and equal, this is one of the things which differs us from a lot of Russians. And remember, this is a Ukrainian speaking. And that's, I believe, a part of our future victory. Moving forward, You Animals continues to ramp up its fundraising and recovery efforts while expanding its network of shelters outside the country, a necessary step as Ukrainian shelters and reserves are rapidly filling to capacity with animals too wounded to ever be released back in the wild. We have big shelters for bears, for example, Chavanyuk said, but they are already full. I'm afraid that if something happens, we'll need to bring those animals abroad. So we are very grateful to all our partners in different organizations, different countries, because there's a big need right now. The organization is also tapping back into its activist roots to bring international attention to conditions in Ukraine. February, they organized Stop Ecocide in Ukraine rallies in 4 U.S. cities, and it attracted hundreds. Back in my day, there were thousands of people in Washington, D.C. protesting Iraq. But the problem now, well, we won't go there. There's a lot of problems now. In a way, this is a return to form. We used to create huge animal rights marches, just like I was in 30 Ukrainian cities every September. But since the war started, we are more focused on the emergency. And the international community has started to take notice. That's good. So it said it still could take years for Ecocide to become international law, but meanwhile, the destruction of Ukraine continues, as do recovery efforts. If our team knows there is an animal that needs rescue, they will go in. And so they even had more, this was another article on this. There's a lot. And I wanted to share that with you. And this is the same, that paradise. It's just one more story on the one of the natural beauties, the natural parks. It's just really pretty bad. And I wanted to bring that to you. We're just on an hour. I see you've all been talking and chatting. We need peace. There needs to be an agreement. But can madmen make agreements? And I will leave that up to you to decide who are the madmen. Friday night, we'll see you with the State of the Planet with Antonio, Nicholas, Jennifer, and myself. Oh boy, that's going to be a show. Nicholas has a lot to say. And if you're on his Facebook or his Patreon, he's been posting a lot. And he just came back from Colorado for a disaster management meeting. And let me tell you, disaster management is what they're doing in Ukraine. Disaster management is really basically going to be, going forward, a pretty big field. And psychologists to help them. Good night, everyone. And as Reg says, butterflies, not bombs. And now I got to find it. Butterflies, not bombs. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.